What's going on, everybody? Good morning. We have made it to the Sunday after the draft, and I figure the best thing that we can do to kick things off with the post-draft period of Seahawks coverage is to take a look at what the Seahawks did right after the draft ended. And what they did was hit the UDFA market. They went out, made calls, made contacts among players that did not get drafted by any team with the, 257 picks, and offered them opportunities to come in on the roster, the 90-man roster that we're going to have during the offseason, and see what they can do. So, let's take a look at what they did in UDFA. I think they're done now. My understanding was they had room for 16 UDFAs, and I believe they now have signed 16 UDFAs. They've also made a series of invites, which is different. There's a difference between a UDFA signing and inviting somebody to your minicamp, and I'll get to that at the end of the video as well. Now, again, those guys are the long shots of the long shots. The odds of any of those guys making the team at all is astronomical, but the UDFAs are always interesting. I would say that on average, you can expect one UDFA to make your team per year. It doesn't always pan out like that, obviously, but I'd say one, maybe two, you would expect to make the 53-man roster, and then there are a couple others that are going to make your practice squad. So some of this stuff matters. The Seahawks have had pretty good luck with the UDFAs over the John Schneider tenure. Not as much recently, but you go back to the start, there was a lot of UDFA goodness going on. And even last year, you had a guy like a Jake Bobo. We got a little bit out of a guy like a Jake Krivoshein. They were not nothing players. They had something of an impact on the team, and they were better than another guy that we could have gotten at the same position at the same approximate slot. So, Field Goals compiled the list of UDFAs and invites, so shout out to them. And some of this stuff we already know. I went over a lot of this in my initial video, including some of the stuff that's really appealing to me and the stuff that I know about. A lot of these guys, I'm just going to say, I don't know anything about them. So I'm going to need some time. I'm going to need to look into it. I'm going to need to try to seek to understand it on a little bit of a deeper level than just, this is his name, this is his position. But what I can say is that we landed a few guys that I had on my radar, and at least one guy who I was pretty sure we were going to get, we got immediately after the draft ended. So let's take a look at the Field Goals article. So, they went Jack Westover, which I already spoke about in the initial video. In fact, that one was done like 30 seconds after the draft ended. Makes all the sense in the world. He has a pretty easy pathway to the practice squad, in my estimation. He has to beat out Brady Russell, and that's probably about it, because the former practice squad tight end, I imagine he's not going to have any kind of a leg up because he was kind of a Carroll guy, and we don't have Carroll as coach anymore. So a guy like Westover might have a leg up because of his experience with the OC. He's too small to be a full-time player in the NFL. He's kind of a Jacob Hollister type, but he does have good hands. And he was routinely a reliable third down or even fourth down option as a check down safety valve for Penix at UW. So there is some value here. So I like this one a lot. This one's great. Then we did Nelson Caesar, and he was a guy who I thought was going to get drafted. I wasn't super high on him or anything like that, but I liked him. I thought there was some draftable talent there. So this was a pretty big one as well for me. I think that a Nelson Caesar has, I mean, when you think about it, if the Seahawks decide to let Darrell Taylor go and then not replace him with anybody high profile, Nelson Caesar has a path to the 53-man roster. And if he doesn't make the 53-man roster, he's probably going to make the practice squad if we're able to get him to it. So I imagine we'll see Nelson Caesar's name unless he just has a bad camp. Then there was George Holani. He was the next guy we got. This was the running back that we met with pre-draft from Boise State. A lot of people really like this guy. I didn't get a chance to look at him pre-draft, but I was aware of his existence. I was aware of some degree of interest on the part of the Seahawks, and I didn't think he was going to get drafted. I didn't think he was particularly close to getting drafted, but I'm not surprised that we have some degree of interest here because we had interest beforehand. So Holani's a guy that I'm going to look into in the coming weeks here. But we did offer him a decent chunk of guaranteed money. In fact, quite a few of these rookies got some guaranteed money. I know that a guy we're going to talk about in a second here, Greenfield, did. So there's some commitment there. Now, it's not enough money to where they're guaranteed a roster spot, but there is some commitment to a guy like George Halani. You've got Chevon Cordero, a quarterback from San Jose State. Don't know anything about him, never heard of him before, but I'll see what I can do. Obviously, this is at best your practice squad quarterback. You're not bringing him in expecting him to beat out Sam Howell or something, but he'll probably end up on the practice squad at best. Can't imagine much more than that, and that's fine. I think practice squads need a quarterback. If you don't have a quarterback on your practice squad, I think that's just makes everything a little look weird. Wyoming linebacker Easton Gibbs signed with the Seahawks as well. Another guy that I don't really know very much about, but fundamentally it seems like the right idea. I did want linebacker. We have basically, since we only drafted one linebacker, and I don't think Radigan's going to make the team, we don't really have any linebacker depth. We don't really have anything going on behind the top three guys. And one of the top three guys is a rookie who is very raw to my eye. So I do think that Easton Gibbs has a pathway to the roster if he impresses. And he's got a very good chance of making the practice squad, if not, because of the lack of depth we have there right now. This, to me, was the big one. Garrett Greenfield. Like Garrett Greenfield, could see him at left tackle, could see him at right tackle, could see him sliding inside the guard. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I definitely thought Greenfield was going to get drafted. And we did throw a significant amount of guaranteed money at him. So it does seem like we valued having him, and there might even be a pathway to him on the active roster. Now, again, the amount of guaranteed money is not so much that we're stuck with him. I don't want to imply that. But it does seem like there's something here that we like more than a typical UDFA, which is absolutely correct on our part. It's correct on our part to feel that way. He's clearly good enough to be, I'd say, at least a 6th round pick, maybe even a 5th round pick. So if we decide, hey, Stone Forsyth doesn't fit our formula anymore, we want to go this way, then that's actually one way to save a little bit of money. You could have Garrett Greenfield be backing up Charles Cross on the left side. So like this one quite a bit. This was great value. He was one of the guys I scouted, so I was a little familiar with his game, and I think he was a pretty good player. So that's a good one. Added a center from Kansas, Mike Nowitzki. I like to say Nowitzki, though, because my favorite basketball player ever. That just makes it hit a little bit harder. But center, going to be a tricky path to him to the roster. Maybe he makes the practice squad. I guess I'd rather have him around than Joey Hunt, right? And we had Joey Hunt for a little bit last year, so it's not like that's so ridiculous a comparison to make. But I don't know anything about him as a prospect. SMU Mustang defensive tackle Devere Levelston. We've got quite a bit going on with the young guys that have a little scrap of potential on the defensive line, so there's not a great path to him getting on the roster or even really the practice squad unless McDonald wants to turn over the roster there. If he looks at a guy like a Miles Adams, looks at a guy like a Onugiogu and is just like, let's just get these guys out of here. I want new stuff. Maybe then, otherwise it's going to be tough for Levelston. We've got North Dakota State running back Tamirick Williams. I did want a viable number 4 running back in this UDFA class. I think Halani's clearly the clubhouse leader, but Tamirick Williams, he's going to have an opportunity for sure because I think it was Kobach, right? I think Kobach retired, so he's out of the equation now. So a guy like Tamirick Williams will probably get, at the very least, camp reps, maybe practice squad reps. I don't know anything about the player other than that he played for North Dakota State. This one's actually pretty interesting. This is a guy I was somewhat familiar with, Idaho wide receiver Hayden Hatton. He's got a little something, and obviously there's not really room on the active roster for a receiver, but at the same time, we know that part of the reason why is because you've still got Eskridge there, and Eskridge could be pushed out by somebody else. Somebody like a Hayden Hatton could maybe surprise you in the same way that Jake Bobo surprised last year, or to a certain extent, I'd say that Derek Young a couple years ago surprised. by being able to make the roster and actually be active for games and do stuff that was relevant. So keep an eye on Hayden Hatton as the offseason goes along. He may, at the very least, I would say he's probably a practice squad candidate at the minimum. And I would like him to be able to make the practice squad with the little bit I know about him. I didn't scout him or anything like that, but what I've seen, the little bit that I've seen is pretty okay. Road Torrance, this was a defensive back, I think a cornerback, who was very close to being in the draftable area of the aggregate. So I almost looked at him, but I ended up scratching him off at the last second. But Arizona State defensive back, he was a guy who was on the very cusp of being draftable to me. So again, well, not to me as in I evaluated him. I didn't get a chance to, but he was very close to being draftable according to the aggregate big board. So seems like a value pickup. Now, will it mean anything? I don't know. Again, I haven't had a chance to look at him yet. Carlton Johnson was a guy we had a top 30 visit on. He was another guy who just barely didn't make my cut. I had to scratch him off at the last second. Didn't have time to look at him. But Fresno State cornerback was a guy that we liked what we saw. He's got some really interesting talent. He ran a really fast 40. There are some questions about his effort, I think, but I'm going to have to look more into it to try to understand it. I have limited information with Carlton Johnson, but what I've seen is mixed. He seems talented, but a little uncommitted. And then there was Rayson Williams, Louisiana Tech defensive lineman. Not familiar with him at all, but it's another defensive lineman, and it's going to be a little tough for those guys to get on. You've got a Grambling State edge, Sundiata Anderson over here. So that's a interesting school. I haven't heard about that college in quite some time. But edge rusher, I think he, other than Caesar, he's the only edge rusher we brought in here. So don't count him out. We're probably going to need an edge or two on the practice squad. And then we had a Tennessee linebacker, Aaron Beasley, signing with Seattle on a UDFA deal as well. So another linebacker, played for a major school at least, but again, I'm not familiar with his game, so I'm going to have to take some time to look into that. And then we had another Tennessee player, cornerback and returner, D. Williams. The return part's interesting, right? Because returning is going to be more important than it was previously. And unless we want to use McIntosh or maybe Eskridge, we don't have an obvious return man candidate on the roster right now. And these kickoff returns are going to mean something now. And that was it. That was 16, I believe. If I counted correctly, that's 16 UDFA signings. And I don't think we had room for more. So I think that's it. The rookie minicamp invites real quick. Boise State offensive lineman Kate Beresford. We had Oregon State wide receiver Josiah Irish, South Carolina running back DeKirion Joyner, and SMU defensive tackle Elijah Chapman. Washington State safety, so some people are going to maybe circle the wagons around this one a little bit. Sam Lockett III. He actually had put up some pretty good numbers last year, I know that, but I'm only somewhat familiar with his game, just a little bit I see from Cougar games. We also had Washington State linebacker Devin Richardson and Arizona State linebacker Travion Brown. So that was a pretty decent selection of Pac-12 defenders, I guess. However, I don't know anything about them really. I know a little bit about Sam Lockett, but even that, not really. And again, these guys are, long shot doesn't even begin to describe it, right? Rookie minicamp invites. These are the guys who aren't good enough to get a UDFA deal, but are good enough to warrant being asked to move around a football field in a general manner as a football player does for a professional team. So I'm not going to get too mixed up into these guys, but those are the names. And that's it. That's everybody. So those are your 16 UDFA signings. And those are your rookie minicamp invites. Look for a couple to make the 53-man roster and look for a few more to make the practice squad. And maybe a couple more don't make it here, but make it somewhere else because of what they show while they're here. That's part of the drive as well. All right, so that's a pretty good way to start off the first day post-draft, cleaning up UDFA stuff. Let me know what you think. Let me know what jumps out to you. Does anything in this crop stand a chance of sticking to you? All right, see you guys later. Go Hawks. More soon.